So first and foremost, it's a real pleasure to be a part of a discussion which involves my teacher, Dr. Surendra Kumar sir, and again, it's especially on a topic which it's very close to me and Dr. Surendra sir because we have done a lot of research on this. We have several papers published on the topic of steroid-induced hyperglycemia, and I think entirely this inspiration actually comes from Dr. Surendra sir because I was his PG student, and when I first joined endocrinology, I was more interested in doing a study on something else. But he said, no, you do a study on steroid-induced hyperglycemia because it not only is going to help us now, but in future, it's going to really help you in your practice. And true to his words, right now, we are dealing with a situation of COVID-19, and all I'm doing since the morning, since I went to the hospital in the morning, all I've been doing is basically managing steroid-induced hyperglycemia, and that's the impact of this, and hence a very important topic in the midst of a pandemic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss two cases for managing steroid-induced hyperglycemia in a critical care setting for patients on glucocorticoids. Now the first case, this is based on two of our papers. One of them is published in IJEM. That is the only, I believe the only RCT from India on this topic, that is comparison of two protocols in management of glucocorticoid-induced hyperglycemia amongst hospitalized patients. And you can have this is freely available on IJEM. And it's also well cited. Now we have, last count about 20 citations to this, which is, good. And the second is the actual case is actually published as a case report as well. So it's published in International Journal of Diabetes in Developing Countries, and you can see the screenshot below. So this is a patient. This is a real patient, 67-year-old female, obese female. There's no past history of diabetes. Her baseline HbA1c was in a pre-diabetic range with an HbA1c of 5.8, and she was admitted under neurology in the ICU with stroke. Now on the neuroimaging actually showed superior sagittal sinus thrombosis. So she was having a thrombotic stroke, venous thrombosis, and her, they evaluated her. They found that ANA was weakly positive, but the ANA profile was positive. So there was SSA, RO, and SSP antibodies positive. So rheumatology consultation was sought, and her thrombophilia panel revealed a MTHFR mutation with factor V leading mutation, which was positive. So very interesting patient from internal medicine perspective also. And then the rheumatologist was called, and the rheumatologist started the patient on oral prednisolone in the dose of, so by this time the patient was in ICU under observation, but she could take orally, and hence the rheumatologist started her on oral prednisolone in the dose of 30 milligram administered in the morning time. Now after starting the prednisolone, as expected, this is an obese pre-diabetic female. After a couple of days, she started developing significant hyperglycemia. Dr. Malhotra sir already talked to you about how you screen these patients for hyperglycemia. She was started on basal bolus insulin as per standard hospital protocol once she developed hyperglycemia. But then she started developing two episodes of hypoglycemia, one with and one episode of severe hypoglycemia, which was defined as blood glucose more than 300 during this period. So typically what happens is, in diabetic patients or otherwise even in normal patients, when you give steroids, it depends on the patient's endogenous HPA axis. Now if the patient's endogenous HPA axis is very robust, they generally tolerate glucocorticoids for a long time. But if there is some compromise to the HPA axis, now when we took retrospectively history of this patient, the patient gave a history of taking alternative medications for a long time, and there is perhaps some exposure to glucocorticoids in the past, which in an occult form which we are not aware. So a patient who is having a compromised HPA axis, when you give this patient's glucocorticoids, as Dr. Malhotra sir said, that you tend to develop post-lunch hyperglycemia, typically seen with prednisolone. But over a period of time, these patients also develop morning hypoglycemia. So you'll typically see that these patients will have fasting sugars in the range of 60, but post-lunch sugars will be in the range of 200 to 50, right? So this is the typical pattern that you see in patients, especially those with a compromised HbA axis. So this is what this patient also had. Her mean glucose value was 184, and there was a standard deviation of 61, which is again suggestive of a lot of glycemic variability. So this is what was on basal bolus insulin. So this patient was given on basal bolus insulin, and you can see the fasting sugar is on the lower end. In fact, you can see periods of hypoglycemia here. The pre-lunch sugar starts increasing. pre-dinner sugars are again coming back to normal, and bedtime sugars are again on the lower side. So this is a typical pattern you will see if you're giving a prednisolone or a methylprednisolone in the morning time in your diabetic patient. So this is a diabetic or a non-diabetic patient, and this is a typical profile that you will see. Now, Burt et al. Actually did a study in similar subset, and what he found was that if you take different sets of people, again you see a similar pattern. So diabetic patients tend to have post-lunch, post-dinner hyperglycemia. A non-diabetic subject also on prednisolone develops a little bit of hyperglycemic peak post-lunch. A non-diabetic subject, that's a group 3, a non-diabetic subject not on prednisolone, you can see a relatively flat curve. So that is used as a control group. So typically what this tells us is that patients tend to develop post-meal hyperglycemia, and this tends to sort of exacerbated by the glucocorticoids. Iwamoto again did a very beautiful study using SMBG in hospitalized patients. You can typically see the 2-hour post-lunch sugars seeing a typical peak there, and then again sugar coming back to normal. And the fasting you can see is slightly on the lower side. So his average is around 90s. Which is again, and the post lunches goes as high as 250, you can see from this. So based on this, Wang actually gave a very beautiful idea, right? And this again Dr. Malhotra talked about in his opening presentation. What he said was, when you're giving a prednisolone in the morning, you give NPH along with that, right? Why NPH? Because the glycemic effect of prednisolone and the glycemic effect of NPH perfectly matches. Right, so hence he said along with the glucocorticoid you give NPH, and this is the first original idea we found in the literature, where Wang was the first to actually suggest this type of clinical practice, which is in our day-to-day practice become very, very useful. So we actually went one step ahead in our study, and what we did was we actually said, now in practice we do not see all of the patients being given prednisolone, right? Some of these patients are given dexamethasone, some of these patients are given hydrocortisone. So you use different steroids in clinical practice. So for all these patients, an NPH may not work because the hyperglycemic effect of different glucocorticoids may be different. So what we suggested is that instead of just giving NPH to all patients with glucocorticoids in the morning time, we give a insulin which matches the effect of the steroids, right? And we give it along with the steroid. So there are two purposes which it solves. Once the hyperglycemic effect of the steroid is matched by the insulin which you are giving. Secondly, if the dose of the steroid is down tapered, then we can progressively down taper the dose of insulin which you are giving along with the steroid. So that is the idea. So what we proposed in our study, the RCT which we published, we said that for hydrocortisone you give a regular human insulin, the ectropid. For prednisolone or methylprednisolone you give an NPH, and NPH is also available from Novo Nordisk, which is known as Insulatard, right? So it's available in most of the good hospitals now, and most pharmacies. And for dexamethasone, originally when we published the study, we talked about insulin glargine, but we also believe that I think insulin degludec may be a very effective insulin to be used with dexamethasone, because the effect of the hyperglycemic effect, it's the longest acting steroid, the hyperglycemic effect of dexamethasone and degludec perfectly matches. So you'll be able to give this insulins along with the glucocorticoids. Now this is the proposal which we had given. It's a slightly complex and busy slide, so I'll not go into too much detail. This is available in our paper, which is available in IJEM. So this is the protocol which we had made for management of glucocorticoid induced hyperglycemia. So to put it simply, a patient already having diabetes with poor glycemic control, that is HbA1c more than 8.5, we would give this patient basal bolus insulin, but additionally we would give an extra insulin which matches the effect of the steroid, right? So that is what we typically did in our practice. And for those patients who are non-diabetic, who develop hyperglycemia, we just give the correctional dose of insulin along with the glucocorticoids. So for example, let's say a patient with HbA1c of 5.8 is given prednisolone. All we do is, along with the prednisolone, we give this patient NPH. Right? Same way, let's say a patient with HbA1c of 5.8 at baseline is given dexamethasone. All we do is, along with the dexamethasone, we give insulin degludec, and that covers the effect of the dexamethasone. So that is what we typically do. But if the patient has HbA1c of 10 or 11 and the patient is then going to be given dexamethasone, then we give additionally basal bolus insulin, plus we factor in extra glargine or degludec to counter for the effect of the dexamethasone. So that is what we typically do in practice. I skipped these slides because this has been already talked about by Dr. Malhotra. And what we found was, when we used the new protocol that we developed, we found a better glycemic control. You can see the curve is flatter. So if you see the control group where you use a standard basal bolus therapy versus the experimental group, we actually had better glycemic control. Also the glycemic variability was much lower. So not only did we achieve better glycemic control, we also had less glycemic variation. In fact, glycemic variability is a very important factor, what studies have shown, for in-hospital morbidity and even mortality, because when I talk about glycemic variability, not only am I talking about high sugars, but I'm also talking about low sugars, and low sugars can lead to hypoglycemia, can lead to arrhythmias in hospitalized patients, in vulnerable patients, which could be potentially dangerous. So what we did, right, so this was before, so the patient was on basal bolus insulin, that case we talked about, and then what we did was we stopped the basal bolus insulin and we just started the patient on an NPH given along with the glucocorticoid in the morning. We just gave one insulin to this patient, right, one insulin with the steroid, right, that's all we did, and you see the glycemic control. Immediately the glycemic control improved, right. So it's, you know, you can say magic, right. Simply I am using one insulin along with the glucocorticoid in the morning time. Not only am I you know, using less amount of insulin, less needle pricks for the patient, but also I am achieving a better glycemic control, less glycemic variability, everything, you know, hits perfectly. So I think we have all been told that, you know, you need to work smarter, right. We all, you know, as physicians, we have always been told to, you know, use your brains for, you know, better efficiency rather than to, you know, use your brains for, you know, more insulin. So again, you know, this is a perfect example of using, you know, a single insulin which matches the effect of the glucocorticoids and achieving a much better glycemic control. Again, you can see the difference. Overall, in our study, we found that, you know, this is the basal bolus insulin, and this is when you use the new protocol, and again you can see a much flatter curve, no ups and downs like you see in a you know, in a basal bolus insulin. So this is the first case, that is a patient on in ICU having stroke, given prednisolone, and then developing hyperglycemia, and how we used NPH to counter that. And this entire case is available to you, you know, in the you know, International Journal for Diabetes in Developing Countries. The specific case is available, so it's again makes a very interesting read for those people who are interested. Looking at the second case, which is more in tune with what we are dealing with in day-to-day practice these days. So this is a 54-year-old female, known case of type 2 diabetes with pre-existing poor glycemic control, reports to the emergency. Her HbA1c is 8.9%. She's on oral antidiabetic. She's on a sulfonylurea with metformin plus premix insulin, and she has clinical symptoms which are, you know, suggestive of COVID-19. So they send an RT-PCR which turns out to be positive. The baseline SpO2 at, you know, without oxygen was 85%. So naturally, considering the comorbidities, you know, baseline poor glycemic control, RT-PCR, SpO2, everything, the patient was admitted. The patient was admitted in the ICU. So on admission, the patient was admitted to ICU, given supplemental oxygen. The random blood sugar at the time of admission was 290 milligram per deciliter. Now, supplementary oxygen was started, remdesivir was started. As per protocol, the patient was started on injection dexamethasone, 6 milligram IV OD. The random blood sugar went to 430 after almost 1 or 2 hours of the same, and an endocrinology reference was sought. The beta hydroxybutyrate and urine ketones were negative. Patient had a creatinine of 1.4, eGFR of close to something like 40 or 50s. The potassium was 5.2. So this is what the patient was having at baseline when I first saw the patient in the ICU. Now, what we are talking about is management of hyperglycemia in such a patient, right? And in such a patient, remember, now we are dealing with a situation which is completely different from what the situation was earlier. Now we are dealing with an infected patient who is likely to be, you know, who is critically ill, who is likely to develop even more severe hyperglycemia compared to what the patient was having baseline. So basically, it's like adding fuel to fire. So already the patient, so there are a couple of things which are already in, you know, negative in the sense from hyperglycemic point of view. The patient is already having poor glycemic control. The patient is on insulin, perhaps has missed a dose of insulin also because of all these issues. Patient is having COVID-19, and we know that COVID-19 itself is known to produce, you know, new onset of hyperglycemia. And apart from that, the patient is then given dexamethasone. So how do you manage such patient? So in such patients, you know, the standard recommendation is don't give basal bolus insulin, don't give, you know, insulin to match the steroids. What you need to give is, you need to start this patient on ICU insulin protocol or insulin infusion protocol, right? Remember, in these patients, it is very important to get glycemic control in a steady and you know, standard way as early as possible. So what we typically do in such patient is you start the patient on insulin infusion in such diabetic patients, and we all are aware about the indications, ketoacidosis, hyperosmolar coma, so on and so forth. But, as you see from this guideline, patients having temporary severe hyperglycemia induced by medications like glucocorticoids or patient having acute illness are indications for use of IV insulin. So again, such patients should be started on IV insulin. How much glucose values should we target in such a critical ill patient? The typical range would be 140 to 180 milligram per deciliter. This is based on the NICE sugar trial, right? So there are many protocols available for you to use. Portland, Duke, Yale, Gangaram Hospital also has a protocol, Medanta has a protocol, Mayo, etc. Whatever protocol you use, whatever protocol you are comfortable with, it's easy to use. Sir Gangaram Hospital's protocol again has been published, so you can check out the publication. It's published in the current medical research journal, so you can check out this protocol. It's a very simple protocol to use in practice. Does it really matter what protocol to use? It doesn't really matter, right? Hardly matters what protocol you use. Basically, you need to manage the patient in the similar way. So what we typically do is we prepare an IV insulin infusion, 40 units or 50 units of insulin, regular human insulin, or you can use a short acting analog in 40 or 50 ml of normal saline to create a 1 unit per ml of infusion. We start, obviously check the potassium before starting the infusion, and if the patient is having hypokalemia, we correct that. We initiate the infusion typically in DKA patients with 0.1 units per kg bolus followed by 0.1 units per kg per hour of infusion. But in non-DKA patients, typically a simple rule of thumb is divide the random sugar by 100 and initiate it to the nearest 0.5 value per hour. For example, let's say the patient is 430 milligram per deciliter. You divide by 100, that you get 4.3. Rounded to nearest 0.5 value will be 4 units per hour. So my typical orders for such a patient would be 40 units of Actrapid, 40 ml of NS. Start it at 4 ml per hour and then hourly correct the sugar, right? What we typically do is we check the sugar 1 hourly initially till the to adjust the rate of infusion till we have a standard to have a stable glycemia. How do you adjust the infusion rate? That is where the protocol really comes into picture. So this is the Yale protocol, and you can use different protocols, but I'll tell you something simple. If you have a mobile phone, you download this app. This is known as the Insulin IP Calculator. This is actually based on the Yale protocol. It's a very simple app, free to use app. You can download this. Right in the screen, here of course the target glucose is slightly different from what we are used to, that is 140 to 180, but it's very similar, so it's almost the same. You enter the current blood glucose value, you enter the previous value, you enter the time between the values, and you calculate the infusion rate, and automatically it will give you the infusion rate based on the Yale infusion protocol. So it's very simple to use. For example, let's say the patient's current blood glucose 350, the previous was 320, 1 hour between the readings, current infusion is 3.5, then it says that, looking at this, they are suggesting 5.5 units per hour. So you can change the infusion rate depending on that. What should be done if there is, what should be the typical rate of change of fall? So if it's 140 to 180, your rate of fall should be steady. If it's 180 to 250, you should try to achieve 20 to 40 milligram per deciliter per hour of glucose reduction. And if it's more than 250, 40 to 80 milligram per deciliter per hour. Right, so this is what we can typically do. What if patients develop hypoglycemia? Again, you can use insulin IP calculator, but of course, most doctors working in hospitals are very well accustomed with correcting of hypoglycemia, which is a very straightforward process, right? Once the glucose are stable, then you can check typically at 2 hours interval, and then typically then switch to 4 hour or 6 hour interval, and such things you have to, right? And ultimately, once the patient starts taking orally, you can switch to subcutaneous insulin. Now you would be asking me why I'm discussing this as a part of management of steroid induced hyperglycemia. Well, the type of patient I talked to you about, that patient needs insulin infusion, right? Nothing else. 430 sugar at the time of admission, already on dexamethasone 6 milligram, already having COVID-19, likely to, may require ventilatory support. We don't know that, right? We don't know what is going to happen. So in such a patient, instead of giving subcutaneous insulin, which may, again, the absorption may be a problem, there may be other issues, it is better to give such patients IV insulin therapy. Again, once the patient has stable glucose values, normal ANAN gap, clinically stable, not on vasopressors, in such a patient, you can switch to subcutaneous insulin. What you do is you take a period of 6 hours when the patient's glycemia has been stable. You multiply that by 4 to get a 24-hour dosage, and 80% of this is given as basal dose, and then half of it, so you give this as a basal dose, and then you give an equivalent amount of short-acting insulin before your meal. So typically, let's say I'm dealing with infusion of 1 ml per hour for the past 6 hours. So it's 6 units over past 6 hours, that is 24 units over 24 hours. So 80% of this will be 20 units. So I typically start the patient on 20 units of degludec with equivalent dose of short acting insulin, like for example Fiasp. So I'll be giving 766, right? So something like that. So you can give it that way, right? So this is a typical, let's say 20 units of basal insulin, degludec with Fiasp of 7 units before breakfast, 7 units before lunch, and 6 units before dinner, right? And typically we give a period of, if you're using a short acting insulin, you need to have about 1 to 2 hours of overlap. If you're using a longer acting insulin for before discontinuation, typically you can have a infusion overlap of about 3 to 4 hours. Now, what other precautions you have to take when the patient is on glucocorticoids? There are certain things which you need to be aware, which not only you need to be aware, but your clinical team needs to be aware, and they need to report to you in such scenario, right? So first you should know what glucocorticoid is being used and what is the dose of that is being given, right? So most of these ICU patients typically we see are given dexamethasone, but depending on the treating pulmonologist or maybe some other critical care specialist or whatever, somebody may prefer giving a may prefer methylprednisolone, right? So you need to really know what glucocorticoid is given and what dose of it is given. Like we discussed earlier, we also need to understand the glycemic effect of that glucocorticoid. So for example, if the patient is on methylprednisolone or prednisolone given in the morning time, you can expect that after the effect of that goes away, the patient's sugar will start getting lower on the lower side. So you can then adjust the infusion depending on the about after 8 to 12 hours you can start reducing the infusion rate, right? And also you need to be aware what happens if the dose of this is changed. So typically in the next day round somebody changes from methylprednisolone twice daily to methylprednisolone once daily, and then you need to be aware of this. This has to be informed to the endocrinologist or the physician who is involved in the care of this, right? And then hence the things should be then adjusted accordingly, right? So basically to summarize, the idea is, if the patient is in ICU, patient is critically ill, patient is having severe hyperglycemia, COVID-19, dexamethasone, better to give IV insulin infusion. If the patient is relatively stable, is taking orally, right? Patient is basically in ICU for an observational period, and in such a scenario, it would be better to treat this patient like you're treating a patient who is not critically, right? For example, you consider giving insulin based which matches the effect of the glucocorticoid. So if it's methylprednisolone or prednisolone, you can give this patient NPH. If the patient is given a longer acting steroid like dexamethasone, you can consider giving this patient degludec or glargine along with the glucocorticoid. So this is my deliberation today, and thank you so much for a patient listening.